Right, tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumie hui hai. So this is probably, Maylee, for you, this is a bit of context on where I'm coming from. In fact, most of us here, Rachel, Andrea, Lucy, and Jen, we all work for VLN Primary. And we're an organisation that works with schools around New Zealand, and students come to us for 30 minutes a week for sort of 30 weeks in the year, and we teach a whole range of different subjects for primary school kids. These are sort of the subjects that I'm coming from. We use Seesaw and Google Classroom as our platforms, and a lot of our stuff is done on Google Slides, and we operate within Google Drive and Google Docs. Yeah, where are you? What's your...
I've just finished a graduate diploma at Waikato University for secondary school.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, university's just finished up, hasn't it?
Last assignments, very grateful.
Oh, congratulations. So are you looking into teaching online? So Marina here, who is multitasking, but she does a similar situation to us. She teaches in just out of Christchurch, but also online as well. This is, are you looking to teach online or just having a...
Oh, wanting to learn as much as I can. It seemed like a really, really good point to start learning the skills, considering this year with COVID, and just finding different ways to help students out. Technology is so important.
Yeah.
Learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. Finding strategies outside is a really good thing to invest in.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. And as a teacher, there's some huge benefits as well, with flexibility and all sorts of things that come into learning online, the same as your students. So a brief overview of what I hope you get out of this session is just to see that there's quite a few similarities between assessment in the face-to-face classroom and assessment activities online, but highlight a few of those differences to look out for. And we're going to reflect on an assessment activity that we have maybe recently used or recently come across at Waikato, and then pick up a few ideas for some online activities that could be used to sort of gauge student understanding. Just in the Zoom chat, is there anything else that anyone is hoping to get out of this session that maybe is not on that little overview? I'm not sure if you're any ideas or any questions around online assessment that you might have.
Maybe strategies towards encouraging student motivation, because assessment's really important, and having them understand the literacy and being able to access that online, that may be something that would be interesting to find out, like a shared document that both students and teachers are working collaboratively on to understand the assessment process and they're involved in it as well.
Yeah, okay, remind me if we come back to that, but
yeah,
around motivation for I guess taking assessment seriously and understanding it. So the first thing that I've sort of picked up, and which was outlined in this resource, which are all at the end of the slideshow. I can pop the slideshow in the chat if you presentation. Is that effective assessment is throughout your planning. That it's not something that is a at the end of the year come to assess. Just like in the face-to-face classroom, any effective assessment is actually built in as you're working out your learning objectives. You're thinking about what activities they can learn from and how assessment would be tied into that. So considering the bigger picture is important in that regard as well. I know that at high school, some of those assessment requirements are a lot more stringent that we might have in the primary schools. But you have your learning outcomes, but you also have some of these requirements that come in that are a little bit outside of your control. So for us at VLN, we have school reports as one of our requirements, and in part of that, we like to tie in our assessments into our New Zealand curriculum achievement objectives. And I'm thinking that Marina at the moment is currently working away on NCEA, her external requirements for assessment. And also sometimes there's school-wide assessments that, you know, in primary schools we have PAT tests or EASTLs. And I'm sure, is there other school-wide assessments, Marina, that you do? Or usually it's just NCEA and it's just coming from that body? That is.
Yeah, most of it is just, well, senior school it's NCEA, junior school, of course, it's just like primary ASTLs and you know, teacher set assessments that fit against the New Zealand curriculum. Yeah.
So this for us, this is just an example of a web design course that I teach with VLN, and these are kind of what I look at, take a stand back look at before I even design my program, is what are those achievement objectives sitting in the curriculum.
I was just going to pop in there, Jen. It's Jan, and I just wondered, Maylee, were you interested in strategies for actually, was your motivation interest also about the assessment thing, i.e. actually getting students motivated to value whatever might be being assessed, and the buy-in to actually treat it?
Yeah, getting those hooks, because a lot of the times you can see a student's motivation directly affecting their productivity. And I think I've seen when I went on practicum, a lot of the students, because they didn't have that face-to-face, didn't necessarily log in or complete tasks like they were meant to, which could be the difficulty of online teaching if the students aren't buying into that motivation and they're actually not engaged.
Yeah. I guess the way that I see it is, rather than looking at these sort of requirements that come in from outside of your program, I look at these before I form my big picture. But ideally, I want my key activities to be something that is authentic, that is interesting, that is engaging. So that is the driver for the motivation. What I like to do is maybe not so much assess as a peripheral situation, but use that project for assessment. So it's an engaging activity that is the core you know, and I'll go into it a little bit more. We go through some of those different types of assessment, but definitely those engaging activities, they are assessment opportunities. You know, they don't have to be a separate situation.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think this sort of relates a little bit here as well, in that your assessment is more really about the success of the bigger picture of your program, rather than just a student's capability. Because if you're, if say you have, you know, dropped the ball a bit as a teacher, if you have used technology that your kids weren't familiar with, if they were actually not being able to understand the instructions, they had some literacy barriers, those are bigger picture things outside of your students' capability that you're assessing. You're actually got all of these influences as to why you don't actually know if they can use Google Sites to create a website in my situation. I might have actually poorly written the instructions. My kid might have had internet issues and they actually couldn't get onto Google Sites for the last 3 weeks. So stepping back and understanding maybe why you haven't got the results that you were expecting. Those things all fit into a jigsaw puzzle of effects which need to be looked at. So I kind of think of my assessment activities as sort of this life cycle of a frog. You know, I start out with an activity and I'm like, oh, great, this will be amazing. I'll get these kids to design a website. And then I roll through the first try at it and I'm like, oh, that was a mess. You know, that had potential, but it didn't actually work. So the next time I teach it, I've made some adjustments. I've asked my kids, what happened? You know, why didn't that work? Why didn't you? I thought you were into it. Oh, we couldn't do this and we couldn't do this and this happened. So then I adapt my activities, and it goes on this journey. And I guess it's not being afraid to sometimes just ditch stuff that's not working and bring in a new tadpole, you know, like bring in something else to work with, or keep it evolving. So assessment activities, I see them as, they're not set in stone, you know, with kids they'll change, and hopefully as a good practitioner, you are constantly evolving your program and the activities within it. This is just a review that I do at the end of the year on all of my courses about feedback from my students and my own reflections about kind of what went wrong and what changes I might make. So every year that I've taught this web design course, I've done a bit of feedback from my kids, some own self-reflection on some of those assessment activities or the activities as a whole, and I make some changes. So seeing it in that regard can pretty help you evolve your course. These are some of those things that you're talking about, mainly around low level of motivation, you know, so this is one of those big things that affect whether your assessment is effective or not. But it also sits along a whole plethora of other things, the digital technology skills that kids have, their literacy levels, whether they're ready for independent learning, you know, when we teach online, and I'm sure it's with high school as well as primary, is that student self-management plays a huge role. And it's very hard to distinguish whether you are assessing a student's actually capability on what your course is about, or whether you're assessing actually their ability to turn up on time, their ability to listen, their ability to communicate on Seesaw or Google Classroom. So being able to sort of distinguish between those things is a really difficult thing, that really talking to your kids is sometimes the best option, and unpacking some of these feed-ins to the bigger picture. I know that I did assessment recently with one of my boys, and I had sort of, I knew that he was dyslexic, but he's so competent in class with the web design stuff, and we did a quick little Google Forms test. I was like, oh, what? Finn, you did terribly. And I just said, oh, what happened to the test? He's like, oh, remember, I'm dyslexic, miss. And I was like, oh, shivers, sorry. Take the test with one of your teachers at school. And he's like, oh, that's a good idea. Comes back and, you know, glowing results. But it was that if I had just taken his test without seeing him apply it, I would have just sort of pushed him aside as a kid that didn't really know what we were talking about. But using those multi methods of multi avenues to assessment allows you to sort of pick up the what do you call it, not the abnormalities, but the inconsistencies. You know, when you have a triangulated approach to assessment, you can sort of see if one is falling off. This little diagram here relates to the start of what we're talking about of different assessments. So these PAT and ASTL, I don't know if you've heard of this lingo in secondary at Waikato, but these are school-wide tests that they're not specific to what the content of the kids are learning. But you're hoping that with all of these sort of authentic activities that you do in class, they will be able to understand these school-wide tests. But these only want to happen once a year, because they aren't really that relevant to what you're doing in the classroom in a practical sense. It's all of these sorts of things, our interacting with kids, our observing, our questioning, and our listening. That is what happens on the daily. and then you have these other sort of assessment activities that you can use, and we're going to go into those a bit more. I think a thing to note is that teaching online, although it can, you know, there are some pitfalls to it in terms of connecting with your students, but you are better positioned being digital with this assessment. A lot of what your kids are doing is on your devices. There's recordings can be made, screenshots, you've got posts on your Seesaw or your Google Classroom, collaborative docs like Google Docs. You can track changes, you can see who contributed what. A lot of that kind of intricate detail is right there anyway, and you don't have to do anything else to get your hands on it. It's accessible. So that's a big plus for digital assessment. This is sort of this example that we talked about earlier, where for web design, these are these curriculum objectives around the outside, and looking over those, you come up with those motivating tasks. So the motivating tasks for my kids is to eventually create a website on Google Sites. So that's their motivation. They want to be able to create a website. That's why they've enrolled in this course. But we talk about the different things we need to do to be able to get there. Okay, we need to learn some design skills. You know, where do you put things? We need to learn how to do a bit of a plan and why we need to have a plan. And we need to learn a few of those technical skills. So giving them the idea of how these bits are actually filtering into something that they care about is key. You know, we do this because. Any questions? And if you can't justify why you're doing it, that's one of those moments where you reevaluate actually whether you do need to do it. Maybe you do away with it. And so, for example, these creating website, we have some design skills. These are the sorts of mini activities that come out of that component. And these are sort of all of the different avenues I can use for assessment of their design skills. It could be discussion around some websites that they choose. It could be we bring up a website and they annotate it on the screen in Zoom, and I take a screenshot of that. It could be that we do a little Google form, match the terms to the definitions. And it could be that they might sketch up a design, a plan for a website. And all of those things together give me a really good picture of have they understood the importance of design and how to apply it. And that would be that element of my course. Progression, yeah. So this note here, progression, practice, and extension. This was a sort of a note that obviously not all kids are going to move at the same pace. So giving your students the opportunity to feel success in some of those small steps is really important. You'll have some kids that progress further and need that extension, but it's in small chunks, so a student feels like they're not out of their depth with whatever task they're doing. That multiple approaches element, so that you might have a kid who actually does, and I have this in my class, who does very well with knowing exactly what alignment and balance is. He can explain it, he can get it right on a test, but when we design it, it doesn't seem to come through in what he does, because there's things that aren't in line and it's quite imbalanced. But he knows the meaning behind the word, but his application of it is something that we talk about. But having that Google form lets me know he knows part of it. He knows the academic theoretical side of it. And with all these sort of design activities, I like to make sure that there's different ways assessment is happening. when they create a site, I don't take it on board to nitpick the little bits. What I do is the kids put up their website that they've created onto a shared screen, and we peer assess it. So the kids sitting around will be like, well, why did you put this here? That doesn't look that balanced. And the kid who's created the website, they then have to explain their design decisions. But I can take a step back, and you can let the class roll out that assessment process while you can just sit down and make notes. I guess, any questions so far? So I'm just rolling on. Yep. Another weak point here with online assessment, I guess, is the importance of being really clear and explicit with instructions. Something that's quite different to in the classroom is that you often have a small window to get your instructions across for an assessment or an activity, and then they have this independent time where you don't see them. So if they didn't understand the activity, sometimes for us it can be several days or a week before we get to see what happened. Oh, I didn't really understand so and so. And it sort of prolongs this process where in a classroom, they carry out the assessment pretty much in your presence. And if they have an issue, they can verbalize it and you can re-explain. On the online environment, yeah, that's a little bit more disjointed. So clarity and being and good ordered instructions can really pay off. This is a little activity that you can do with your kids online. You can get them to. Right now, I don't know if we want. No, we won't do it. But you can get them to draw a witch on a piece of paper, and then in their breakout rooms, try and explain their witch to their peers. And their peers are there trying to draw that very same witch, just using what they're describing. And then you can all hold up your witches to your screen and see a diverse range of scraggly haired women that don't look exactly the same. And it's just highlighting that I try my best to communicate with you, but if you think that you don't understand what I'm asking, ask me. Send me an email, send me a Zoom chat, post me up something on Seesaw just to say, I don't understand, I've got a question. This is something that I'm starting to look at a bit more. This is something, sorry, I got chat here. Thanks, Andrea. Cool. How did it go, Andrea, when you did that activity?
Do you mean in real life? Or I haven't done it online. I've just done it in the classroom, and it's always great. They love it, and it's real practical use of their language, and it's using speaking and listening skills, so it's really good in that way.
Yeah,
it's authentic, so it's really cool like that.
Do you think it would be something that you could try that would work with your VLN French classes?
Once I've got a little bit more language. We probably haven't done like personal descriptions yet, so we wouldn't be able to do that. I'm just trying to think what else you could do that with, but yeah.
Gotcha.
Like,
you're actually asking them in French.
Yeah. So they actually draw a person, and then they have to describe in French that person to another person, and they have to draw it without looking at the picture that you've drawn.
Yeah. Going out a different language, whole different kettle. You might even not end up with a person.
Yeah. Exactly. It's quite funny.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I guess let's have a look. That type of activity, if we were looking at where that might sit, and it might come under this one here, like understand, being able to describe, explain, locate something would be an activity that sits on the Bloom's taxonomy of sort of the lower level of understanding. And I guess if we think of a recent assessment activity that we've done, where would it sit? So for me, creating a website, which was the very end of the semester, was up here. But most of the activities that led up to it, the Google quiz, probably down here on the Remember, getting them to recreate an existing site that looks exactly the same, probably under Apply, and Analyze, all of those. So looking at where, I guess, activities sit, and do you have something that is culminating up on the sort of the more on the top end of the cognitive scale? So I don't know if do you have any assessment activities that you've done when you're on placements, or that you've done, Andrea, recently before reports?
Probably nothing that wasn't, I'm just trying to think really. Yeah, nothing that was too revolutionary or different. It's just the usual. For me, it was just trying to get them to show off what they'd actually learnt through speaking, and like presentations and conversations really was my main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And that was stuff I was getting them to do. Most of the time they did it as independent tasks during the week in their own time. Yeah, but sometimes in front of me, and then I did a Google form assessment as well. Yeah.
I was thinking for teaching Te Reo Māori, it's ended up that most of mine have been these Remember, when I do a Google form, it's this Remember type assessment. Maybe some of this understanding, so when we break down our karakia and we look at what words might mean what and why, looking at those language patterns that might sort of lend itself to a little bit of understanding, and maybe even analyzing if they're sort of picking up in those discrepancies. Well, why don't we say tahi when we're saying unite as one, because tahi is one. Picking up those sorts of things. And I guess just randomly we had this Wiki o Te Reo Māori, and these kids put together these videos to help the other schools around New Zealand learn some basic Te Reo Māori. So we had learned it previously, and then they put these videos together to teach sort of pronouns, to say, to greet someone and say, how are you and goodbye. So they had, in a sense, they had sort of pushed into this create zone, not from any assessment that I had pre-planned, but that just sort of happened. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe that should actually be a bit of a key part of my language course. Maybe it should be putting this language into use. So I think, yes, Andrea, as you got in the comments there, maybe sometimes we do tend to put languages on the bottoms of the Bloom scale, but what are those ways that, it doesn't have to be, it's actually one of those things that are just super relevant when you travel to a different country and speak. Like those are, it is super relevant. And, maybe we have a pen pal, or maybe we create a YouTube channel, or maybe we send a video blog to a school that is in South America if we're learning Spanish. So there are probably authentic creating type activities that are sitting within every subject. It sometimes just takes us a bit of pushing to get there. Don't know.
I think possibly the earlier stages of language learning are probably a bit more the lower levels, but definitely the higher levels, especially as you get higher. And from someone who's taught NCEA most of the time, definitely level 2, level 3 stuff is very much evaluate, create, analyze, definitely that level of language. And it's not just about you and your world, it's about the world around you and wider things. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's almost similar with most subjects. You know, you don't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't tend to go right into create mode. You don't tend to jump right up the top. You do look at those foundation skills, just like over here where, you know, this is the goal, but to get to the goal we need this. To get to this, we need to do a little bit of stuff around the outside to really make whatever this main goal is worthwhile and good, because or else you sort of end up with a sort of half pie crappy project when it could be something quite you know, uplifting for the kids to be a part of. So yeah, starting off on this end of the scale was almost a necessity most of the time. Any assessment activities that you have got in your own mind, mainly or subjects that what's your area of expertise that you think you might be delving into?
My area is art and technology design, VCD, but I'm very interested in seeing the other branches. When I went on my practicum, I did do a unit where I had my year 10s create a game. So I left it quite open to them about what they wanted to do, but my main parts that I had for assessment was that they had to identify a target audience, who they were making the game for, and they had to argue how it was able to do this and what it actually did, because they had to have a learning intention behind it. So I gave, for example, that if you have Monopoly, you could argue it's about learning basic maths equations and building an understanding of how trading works and operates. So I definitely think with Bloom's taxonomy, there were those areas that it all hit, but they did have to understand, how do you give instructions? You need to remember what's the age of the students, what objects are you making? They need to be able to apply game mechanics to their boards. They need to analyze, what do they like about, let's say, a pack of cards versus a pack of dice? What one is better for the activity and how they'll use it? And then at the very end, I definitely have found in a lot of my units, I like them doing reflections. So they were able to evaluate, what did they learn? How did they actually go about it? What would they improve? And the big goal, like you said, with the website is they're creating something, but they had to be able to do those steps to build up that knowledge, because it's about learning those transferable skills from the earliest stages for them to really understand what they're making at the very end.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can just recreate another version of Monopoly, but what does that do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I also teach coding to some younger kids, and we make a game, probably likely not as complex, but when I first started teaching that, I kind of went right into making a game, and it sort of ended up this project that I wanted to work on dragging out for so long, because we were teaching the skills as we were going on our main project, and by the end of it, all of us were sick of it. You're like, oh, we're going to work on that game again. I'm like, I don't want to either, but should we give up on it because it's our main project? But now I'm like, right, scrap that. Let's do all these little skills separately. And then by the time we go to the main project, it's just not so laborious, because they have all those things there.
I also found when we were doing it too, that if the students hadn't had time to analyze what they liked about different games, they weren't able to decide what they were wanting to make, because they kept getting stuck between well, why not make a Snakes and Ladders compared to Monopoly? And it'd be like, but what's the intention?
Yeah.
What are you actually teaching the skills, and what are you wanting to do with it? Because the game mechanics are completely different. And you need to be able to evaluate and analyze those differences before you can make that decision in your create. So it gave them those skills.
Did you find that in the reflection, and you're like, if you taught it differently, you would do it differently because of those things? Or is that something?
Well, I definitely need to get the kids to, do more than 1 or 2 worded answers, because even though you say, give some depth, give some thought to what you're writing, it's like, yeah, no, it was all good. I definitely think, reflecting back on it, that the approach I had to it was good, but I underestimated how much students were able to contribute in the time they had in the lessons, because a lot of students were really excited about it. Some of them got to the point where they took it home, they worked on it, but I had to be aware of whatever students were making did have to be achieved just in school time. students that did want to go and do further, that's perfectly good for them. But for students that aren't able to or have other commitments, it's not very fair on them to have that high an expectation that it feels more like a barrier for them. So I think the biggest thing I'd change on that was, yeah, my expectations of what is achievable in that time, because you forget as a functioning adult with years of study and strategies that it is not the easiest thing to just pick up a pencil and write a mind map of ideas.
Yeah,
It
and,
actually,
to do it after school.
oh yeah.
That's
Or even how do you make it collaborative where everyone's not just putting the same answer down? It's like, how do you do the and add to it component?
absolutely, and that's something that at VLN, that's something that we find a lot with our courses. You know, ideally we have such a short time with our kids. We just have half an hour, and so every VLN teacher, and it's sort of like our course protocol, is that there is at least 30 minutes of independent study that goes along with it. But getting that to happen and like hanging your hat on that it will happen, yeah, you're like, oh, okay, cool. So now we're here. I'll spend my time doing this. Whereas you
tomorrow,
get it for
because we
homework.
need more time on this part because
Yeah.
it didn't unpack as much as it needed to necessarily.
Absolutely. And those are things that with every course and with every class that changes, even if you teach the same course, those are things that you have to sort of navigate on site at, you know, right at that time. Okay, so how can I extend this kid who has put in a little bit of time, whereas not leave this kid behind? And that those sorts of problems in praxis are always rearing their head, you know. Absolutely.
One of the things that we have, we could just pop in, sorry Jen, that might spoil it, and I don't want to take it too long somewhere else, but I'm very interested in what anyone else might have also tried too around co-constructed assessment. And it's something that we can be doing with kids of all ages, where, and I was thinking back to the Blooms as well, so actually that becomes part of the whole scenario where they actually, and they may have a go at that at the start, but they also can be having a go at that in varying stages along their work and project, because it's changing their knowledge about what they may believe is valuable to have assessed. I've always been really held to a colleague who did a major university assessment a year or so ago, a very, very smart woman who then had to do the summative assessment that the university required her to do, and was actually really angry about that, because what she believed she could really do best was actually decide herself how to best show her learning and advancement in the whole course. And it really held for me to keep remembering about holding back, to work out, to co-construct, to give students agency, learners agency around what they believe might be worth assessing or considering, or in the project or whatever we're doing too. So I think that's a really interesting one. Just wondered if anyone else, if that's on the lines of what you're still talking about.
I think it feeds back to what Maylee was saying earlier around student motivation. Like if you're the student co-constructing what the assessment is, I think that really lends itself to student buy-in for the learning. You know, you've come up with what you think is important to get out of this, and then that puts you in a far better position to want to achieve it. Yeah. I'm just thinking about how, you know, even if you can take some of that co-construction right back down to, you know, some of these sort of remember and understand based activities with my seesaw, like taking the time to unpack the activity and talk about what amazing would look like, and what was, okay, I've got the basics but I don't have time for amazing right now. Like what would that look like in that particular activity? That even just talking about that, I think would really increase the buy-in of kids.
I think that's a really important point, as you're saying, is to have that kind of exemplar to make that available. So you're saying to them, okay, here we are, we're constructing this, what this would look like, so what are you going to see? You know, what are your success criteria, and whether you need to scaffold that in by providing them some kind of exemplar of that at the early stages. But what you're wanting is them to understand this is how I'm going to assess it myself. You know, that kind of assessment for learning type of notion, that these are the things that they will see when they've done this well, and then they can look for it and they can be coming back saying, hey, yeah, I've done this, you know, these are the things that I've met.
I think I tend to always, on our activities on Seesaw, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Maylee, but you can provide an example of what you're after. And I guess my examples that I will always provide are, this is pretty awesome, this is an awesome example, whereas a lot of the time you get ones that are not quite there, whereas I forget that actually sometimes just getting something done and getting the basic idea, that's good. You know, you don't always need kids to be performing it amazing all of the time, you know, like that's good to have an example. I'm wondering, is it valuable to have the other end of the scale example as well, or do you always model up? What's your thoughts?
One of the challenges about providing templates and examples in the early stages, particularly if you're doing creative things, is that you get kids doing cookie cutter things. In arts with you may be showing them techniques about things, but everybody's picture looks the same. So as a little bit of a balance about how you feed that in to enable creativity, rather than kids who are just trying to comply and make you happy.
Yeah, that's something that I found with Te Reo Māori, is that I would have these I had these templates for kids to help read, to practice their pronunciation. But then when I forgot to put up that template, these kids started making videos of themselves acting it out. And I was like, no one did that earlier, because I put up a bloody template that I just showed words that they would read from. But when I took away the template, I got these amazing videos of these kids acting out conversations. And so that was the flip side of my sort of template experience with Te Reo Māori. That, and those just sort of come from trying out different avenues, don't they?
I guess the thing then is probably, when it comes to assessment, letting the students know that it's flexible as well, in a sense that here are the 4 main components that we need to see, and having that conversation of what does that look like for them? What do they define success as? And that's probably when it's a good idea to give an example of, this is what success is for me, but these are the 4 elements in my painting. This is how I show balance, how I show understanding of color theory, how I show my ability to draw. And those are the 3 things. That doesn't necessarily mean this is what I'm marking by, but if you can show evidence of development and progress, and more importantly, argue your way across, because I think, looking back from my experience as a student, I never felt very confident with what I produced, because I always tried to make sure it was what I saw. And creatively, like you said, that does come up with some cookie cutter things. I think it would have been much better if, as a student, I'd risked it a bit more and tried to explore, rather than filling that cookie cutter, but having a guide of, this is the conversation around that expectation. This is one way to produce it, and these are the steps you can go through to produce your own, would work together more cohesively for a student. So it's not just the example, but also the breakdown and discussion with the student that supports the exemplar, and vice versa. And
knowing that, letting students know that they have the opportunity to justify it, to convince you of, they have done this, and this is how I've done this because of this, this, and this. I think along those lines, having like a rubric, with those criteria, that you can see the differences in the rubric, as they're increasing, but there's still a lot of different ways to approaching whatever that key idea is.
And I guess this is also where if you have multiple points where you are talking with students to go, this is where you're at right now. Where do you see yourself on the rubric? That doesn't remove the chance of them improving and going further. Because if you only give one deadline and that's it, students work to it, and then they reflect and go, oh, actually, if I thought a bit more about how my balance was looking and what I needed to improve it, I would have done that. So I guess it's because this is also like the whole formative conversation happening in the classroom. But I think when you make it a bit more critical with the feedback and it has a bit more of that be prepared to talk, let's get engaged, it gives it a lot more impact compared to just the casual one-on-one with the teacher. Okay, we're talking about what you've progressed and done today. This is some good work. And then you continue on because you've got 20 other kids. Everyone's got to get some feedback. I guess, yeah, having the exemplar, the conversation, working cohesively as a rubric is more effective for the students' development.
Absolutely. And the opportunity to try it again, there's nothing worse, I guess, for me as well. I'm just trying to think where I had it, but to know that that's your one-off chance. It's like submitting, you submit your thesis to your professor and you get the chance to give their feedback and then you redo it. But there's nothing worse than just being like, this is it. Oh God, I hope I got it right. Here's your feedback. This, and this was awesome. This is where you push it a bit further. Now you get another go. And you're like, you get another go. That whole sense of a purpose for improving is super important, like you're saying. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I guess this is sort of, I think for me, my biggest takeout from putting this together is looking over some of the things that I use in my assessment activities and just seeing where the ratio lies. In my language, maybe I was sort of tending to sit more in this area, but I would like to think about how I could add some more of this analysis, application, and creativity into it. And I guess that the main thing to draw out of this is that just like students have that opportunity to redo an assessment, your program and in the activities that you create have that same nature to them. It's not I've created a course, I hope it's good and this is one off. That might have been a flop in that area, but you've got a new batch of kids coming in and you mold that flop into something that can be a really successful, authentic, co-constructed and co-assessed activity, as that frog turns into a big fat old toad. Yeah. Awesome. It was lovely to meet you, Maylee. I've met all these other folks before. But thanks.
Finally got a free afternoon to be like, oh, I'm actually on time. This is great.
No, it was great. Anything else from anyone before we say ka kite?
Thanks. I really love how you brought the Bloom's taxonomy into this. And I'll be really encouraging the rest of our teachers just to take the time to flip through the video later on and to reflect on their own practice and where this sits for them and to give them some ideas. So thanks, Jen. It's been really good.
Good. All right. Ka kite koutou.
Happy birthday for tomorrow.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.